Standing Committee on Social Development. My name is Jane Wayallen Armstrong, and I am the MLA for Moonfie Klitschou Region and Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. I will now ask members in the room and online to introduce themselves for the record. We'll start with Mr. Testart.
Hello, good morning. My name is Kieran Testart. I'm the member for Range Lake here in Yellowknife.
Good morning, Danny McNeely, MLA for the Sawtooth.
Good morning, George Nearsu, MLA for the Mackenzie Delta.
Good morning, I'm Cheryl Yaklaya, I'm a member for the Techo.
Okay. Thank you, members. Today we will okay, Ms. Morgan is back. Please introduce yourself.
Shauna Morgan, member for Yellowknife North. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Thank you, members. Today we will receive a briefing on housing as a human right from officials with the Gwich'in Tribal Council. So this briefing is part of this committee studies on how NWT legislation and policies can incorporate housing as a human right. Please note this meeting is being live streamed to the Assembly social media. I would like to remind all members and witnesses to direct all questions and comments to myself as chair and to wait to be recognized before speaking to help us have a smooth meeting. Now I'll pass it over to Mr. Cooey. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Merci, Madam Chair. So my name is Jamie Cooey. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Gwich'in Tribal Council. So my history is more in government of the Northwest Territories. Prior to moving to the Gwich'in Tribal Council, I'm joined by Kate Jarvis, who is our Director of Housing and Infrastructure. She's got about 19 plus years with working in housing and housing related programs in the Beaufort Delta. So she's got a lot of background kind of to the presentation. So just proceeding with the presentation, so we did get the letter from Standing Committee with a request kind of looking for comments on housing as a fundamental human right. So we put together a short presentation here. Hopefully it's on point. But yeah, looking forward to the discussion after. The letter was fairly open-ended, so we're using it as an opportunity to kind of present on our experiences and go from there. Yeah, so just kind of walk through kind of the objectives of the presentation, some legislation, some of the challenges that we see, the impacts of those challenges, opportunities, and then use that opportunity to discuss kind of the GTC housing program and work that we're undergoing in the Gwich'in settlement area right now. So more on the objectives, obviously advocating for recognition of housing, including the related social programs as a fundamental human right. So advocating for housing as a culturally significant human right. So the need to emphasize that housing is not just a basic need, but a fundamental right intertwined with our Gwich'in cultural identity, traditional practices, and community well-being. It's also promoting housing policies that reflect Gwich'in values and our overall Gwich'in self-determination. Encouraging the GNWT and other policymakers to develop housing strategies that integrate Gwich'in and other Indigenous right holders' cultural and social values, and use UNDRIP as an opportunity for international human rights frameworks to guide policy changes. Another objective of the presentation would be to kind of address housing challenges with strategic solutions and look to identify some of the key challenges such as affordability, accessibility, and the impact of climate change, and the need for culturally relevant, sustainable housing development in collaboration with Indigenous governments and the private sector. And lastly, the third objective was just to go through a short update on the GTC housing program and demonstrate the Gwich'in leadership in housing programs and self-governance. Obviously, we have some funding from the federal government to build housing in the Gwich'in settlement area. So I'll just provide a short update on that, on those housing initiatives that empower our communities through self-determination, and kind of some ideas on how the GNMT and GTC can collaborate on those programs and some of the challenges that I'll speak to today. And really recognizing and promoting the economic and social benefits of investing in Gwich'in housing, and how that investment in culturally appropriate housing drives our economic growth, creates employment, reduces social service costs, and benefiting our Gwich'in communities. Just to speak to the legislation, I know the letter did speak to looking at legislation kind of, globally. So I didn't do a real complete legislative review, but these are some of the more significant ones. So obviously the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms recognizing housing as a basic need for an adequate standard of living. We also hear this loud and clear from our Gwich'in participants. We've been doing housing engagement sessions over the last year, and they've all voiced that the need for housing really drives their overall basic living needs and really drives their overall physical and mental health and well-being. The Declaration of Human Rights follows this theme, reflecting housing being recognized as a fundamental human right. And then UNDRIP as a framework for policy development. So UNDRIP obviously recognizes the rights of Indigenous peoples to improving economic and social conditions, which obviously includes housing. So the principles of UNDRIP should guide the development of housing policies that integrate Indigenous perspectives and uphold the right to self-determination. GTC encourages the GNWT and the federal government to collaborate and to incorporate Gwich'in values into housing legislation, ensuring policies align with both national standards and international commitments. This legislation should recognize that for the Gwich'in, housing is not just a legal right, but also a cultural necessity that supports our traditional ways of life and reduces poverty and enhances community well-being. Moving on to some of the challenges, obviously accessibility, no surprise with the 4 challenges on the slide here, I wouldn't imagine. But accessibility, so obviously many residents face barriers to accessing safe and secure housing due to geographic isolation, limited housing stock, and transportation challenges. High rates of homelessness and inadequate housing, significant wait lists for public housing, and there will be some wait lists for Gwich'in housing when I talk about our programs later. More under accessibility would be land. Obviously, land is tough in most NWT communities. In the Gwich'in settlement area, we found it was a little hard to believe, to do our housing program and build our homes. We had to purchase land within our settlement area, which was a tough one for our leadership to fathom, having to purchase land within our traditional area. But it was just a requirement, so we didn't have time to fight the fight. We just had to do what we needed to do to start addressing the housing crisis. But that was a tough one and some tough checks to write. Affordability. The high cost of living and limited housing supply make affordable housing a significant concern. Policies aim to create more affordable units and subsidize housing costs for low-income residents is required. We're all aware of the costs not only to build, but to operate housing in the Northwest Territories, which is just the reality of the NWT. So currently, GNWT and Indigenous governments are building homes, and we're competing for the same home builders. So is there an opportunity to get creative here in order to address this by working together and not putting that kind of a demand as an opportunity for the home builders with the supply challenge we all face? Adequacy. So many of the existing homes do not meet adequate living standards due to overcrowding, lack of maintenance, poor insulation, which are exacerbated by harsh climate conditions. So housing is not merely a physical space, it represents a fundamental component of social well-being, cultural identity, and economic stability. So the legal and policy frameworks surrounding housing reflect the need to address diverse and complex issues, ensuring that all residents have access to safe, adequate, and affordable housing. As the government continues to develop and implement housing strategies, the focus should remain on human rights, collaboration with Indigenous communities and governments, and sustainable practices to improve housing outcomes for everyone. Security of tenure will be the last challenge to speak to. So, unstable tenure arrangements and rising rental costs threaten housing security for many residents, and there's a need for policies that protect tenant rights and promote long-term stability. There's a fairly large, complex circular social problem here, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. So we have Gwich'in participants who are unwilling or unable to work because they would just breach their social income. So it would affect their income support. It would affect their public house. It would affect their rent or the ability to live in a public house. So how do we motivate those NWT residents to further educate themselves and work in their communities without worrying about affecting their social income or their basic income? So, I mean, the difference between their working income and a socially provided income the difference is becoming quite marginal. So where's the motivation to work? Or are we just moving into a conversation of a universal basic income approach? Some of the impacts that we're identifying, obviously number one, health consequences. No surprise here, poor housing conditions contribute to mental and physical health issues, including respiratory problems and increased risk of infectious diseases. Again, our Gwich'in participants continue to voice their concerns on adequacy of housing and how they need housing as a basic right to be healthy physically and mentally. During our engagement sessions over the past year and a half, we've heard many examples from our participants about the inadequacy of housing, unsafe conditions, inadequate conditions in public housing or elder homes and elder facilities. Securing culturally relevant housing fosters a sense of belonging and security, reducing stress and improving overall well-being. As well as adequate and stable housing reduces the strain on healthcare and social services by lowering rates of homelessness and associated health conditions. Some of the social implications, obviously high rates of homelessness and displacement strain social services and healthcare systems. Inadequate housing affects community cohesion and can lead to intergenerational trauma. The housing stability is crucial for social development, providing a foundation for education, skills development, and participation in the workforce. Again, that goes back to that circular problem I just mentioned, about motivating for our folks to educate and work without fear of losing their homes or affecting their basic income. There's a start of opportunity here when we get to our Gwich'in housing programs. Obviously, we're not targeting public housing, but we are targeting people that might be on the threshold of public housing that might be able to provide a home ownership opportunity through our Gwich'in programs, which I'll speak to in a few slides. Economic effects would be inadequate housing contributes to lower productivity and higher unemployment rates. And unstable housing situations can increase reliance on social assistance and emergency services. Last one being cultural impacts. Inadequate housing affects cultural continuity by limiting spaces for traditional activities and the transmission of Gwich'in language and practices. Housing instability undermines the ability to maintain cultural identity and practice land-based traditions such as hunting, fishing, and gathering. Some of the opportunities we see as GTC would be policy development and creating housing policies that embed human right practices, recognizing housing as a fundamental human right, addressing the specific needs of vulnerable populations to ensure access to safe and adequate housing for all. So on vulnerable population, obviously targeting policies to support low-income families, elders, and those living in remote or climate-affected areas. UNDRIP implementation being one of the largest opportunities as UNDRIP and those programs are further developed on the implementation side. So using UNDRIP as a framework to guide housing policies, ensuring Indigenous rights to self-determination and participation in housing program development are respected. And developing those policies, incorporating Gwich'in cultural values and other Indigenous government cultural values, traditional practices into policy making to ensure culturally appropriate housing solutions. On the support service integration, housing policy should include access to necessary support services, acknowledging that housing stability is linked to overall well-being, and providing those wraparound services to ensure that housing improvements lead to sustainable and long-term benefits. Kind of on Indigenous government partnerships and collaborating with Indigenous governments, this is obviously crucial moving forward, and probably the most strongly pointed wording I'll have in the presentation today. But most Indigenous communities in the NMT are developing their own housing policies and programs, and we're doing so with funding from the federal government. So we're all working on the same things on the repair side, bringing in modular homes, looking at stick-built homes, and all the associated programming, and how each nation is going to put people in those houses, and how we're going to obviously move forward with that for the future. So the GNBT needs to work in partnership with Indigenous governments to ensure culturally appropriate housing solutions. On the infrastructure side, again, housing NBT and Indigenous governments, we're all doing the same thing. We're building homes, bringing them into the same communities, and we're likely competing with the same housing developers on that. There's a lot of economic opportunities here, and the GTC experiences the GNBT does not have much interest in implementing the negotiated contracts policy with the GTC. Housing should be an easy one in that regard. Should be easy and much quicker negotiations where we can work together and leverage opportunities. The GTC history on this with housing specifically, the current process, by the time a contract's either negotiated or denied, you're over a year into the process, and prices are either 20 or 30% higher, just as an estimate, not an exact number. But when you go through that contract negotiation process, the homes are just delayed, takes too long, needs to be less red tape, and needs to be smoother. So as you see, I'll talk to it in a slide, but we're building houses. Other Indigenous governments are building houses. I know the GNWT's position on it has been capacity and expertise of Indigenous governments to build housing of the same quality. But I think the reality is now, Indigenous governments can build them quicker, obviously with red tape. And we can provide them with the same quality. So I think that argument is getting lost, and there should be opportunities here to bring housing in this housing crisis much quicker. Again, Indigenous governments can build houses likely quicker. There's opportunities here to look at entering into long-term leases. GNWT needs housing for their teachers, for their nurses, for all their employees in some of these remote communities. This works in the Yukon quite well, I think, where there's Indigenous governments over there and their development corporations who the Yukon government has built their houses. So they're building houses fairly quickly. I think they're building their social houses and their public houses over there, and the government over there enters into what I understand to be long-term leases, which the Indigenous governments can use to finance these builds and provide these opportunities, right? So I think it helps us satisfy some of the land claim obligations as well, with respect to economic opportunities and some of those obligations of the GNWT. I know there's borrowing limit implications on that, but the Yukon government has the same borrowing capacity and same implications as the GNWT. So if they found a way around it, there must be an opportunity there for us to look at that as well. So we can get creative here and work together to meet the needs of all our NWT communities. Just have a couple quick slides on kind of the GTC housing programs and where we're going right now. We provided these publicly over the last 6 months. We're just kind of finalizing our home ownership policies. So we're building 20 homes in the Gwich'in settlement area this year, 9 in Inuvik, 8 in Tetlitze, which is Fort McPherson, and 3 in Aklavik. We'll be building 4 homes in Sigachik next year. But we're looking at 2 housing programs. Obviously, we're not looking at public housing here. So we're looking at a home ownership program where a Gwich'in participant will be required to qualify for and obtain a mortgage at a subsidized rate, obviously. The GTC will provide the down payment for the home. With the down payment will form a part of a forgivable loan program. And the homes will be sold to participants at a reduced cost. With that forgivable loan portion, a percentage will be forgiven annually, and the full amount will be forgiven in 10 years. And the homeowner will be responsible for all utilities, maintenance, insurance, taxes, and land lease costs. So the land would be leased from the GTC to the homeowner for a period of 25 years. And once that lease has been expired, the GTC will transfer that land to the homeowner. So a land lease is our way to ensure that we can keep the home in the nation. Should the participant want to sell, we will have some provisions in that lease to ensure that it's sold to another Gwich'in participant to ensure the home remains in the nation. However, the goal under the home ownership program is the participant owns the home and the land. When they satisfy their mortgage, that they own the home and the land for their family for the generations to come, which is what we're striving to do under this program. The other program is kind of a rent-to-own program. So the renter will pay a set amount of rent each month. 75% of the payments will go towards the rental fee. And another 25% will be set aside for a future down payment. So that 25% will be set aside for future down payment. So that's one way of us to help our participants, with having the money for a down payment in the future. The program length is a maximum of 5 years, so the participant has the option to purchase the home anytime during that 5 years, and we will use that 25% that we're saving aside as part of their monthly rental payments to help with down payments. If the participant does not buy the home after 5 years, that forfeit amount would be forfeited, and they will be transferred just to a market rental lease. So they still have the opportunity to live in a home but they will always have the opportunity to purchase in the future. Again, the goal is here to keep housing within the nation, within Gwich'in participants. But if the Gwich'in house, it just isn't for them, and they have the opportunity to buy another house within that 5 years, we're looking at that, them being able to use the down payment amount we are saving for them to purchase a home, because obviously the goal here is home ownership for these participants. The sale price will be determined at the beginning of the program and will be discounted substantially. Tenants will be responsible for utilities, renters insurance, and tenant damages. And the GTC will be responsible for property taxes and insurance, and work with homeowners on required maintenance. Obviously, we have a policy issue we need to work around. Obviously, when someone owns a home, they're responsible for a certain amount of repair and maintenance. But the amount we're investing in these, we don't want to make mistakes that may have happened in the past. We want these assets to be maintained and around for a long time. Just 2 more slides on this quickly. Potential program recipients that we're seeing here, and applications are open, and people are applying fairly quickly for our homes. But working participant families, preferably maybe on the younger age, under 40 years of age, or participants paying rent in public housing. Maybe are on the cusp. Maybe they're part of that social problem where they just can't make any money, or it's going to affect their rent. Maybe there's people there that we can target. That can have an opportunity for actual home ownership and building equity in their home moving forward. And participants close to retirement who have sufficient income to rent, own, and maintain a home, and who do want to live and retire in the Gwich'in settlement area. The program cost, we need to keep the program cost with mortgage, with all the utilities and everything I just spoke about. We do need to keep those, within the $1,500 to $2,500 range. So GTC will be subsidizing a good portion of these homes to make sure that we're in that model so that it fits for many of our participants. And obviously, we're looking at the public housing and market rentals that they do based on their market rates when we determine those numbers. And what the program is not is, again, this is not a public housing program. It's not eligible for members, beneficiaries, or participants of other modern treaties. An ability for participants to flip a new home and make a profit within a short period of time. Obviously, that's why the lease and the forgivable loan, we have a couple triggers there where we can protect the asset. And an opportunity for existing homeowners to get into a newer second home. Or an opportunity for those who are engaged in illegal or illicit activity in the community. Just one last slide on housing programs being what we're doing on kind of repair programs. So we did a home assessment program where we assessed participants' homes for those who raised their hand and signed up for it. We'll be doing more home assessments in the future. But to develop an emergency repair program and policy, we need to know the scope of the work. So we anticipate the scope of a repair program for Gwich'in participants, not only in the Gwich'in settlement area, but regardless of where they live. I believe about 60% of Gwich'in participants don't live in the area. So we're mindful of where they live and that they do need repairs and assistance with their homes. But we anticipate this list is fairly long and pricey, so we can't design a policy to do and help with emergency renovations without understanding the scope of the problem. So we undertook home assessments for those participants who signed up. From there, once we know the scope of the problem, we can design a policy, an emergency repair policy, and we can scope it accordingly based on affordability. And so we need to know the scope of that so that we can target funding opportunities going forward. We do have obviously some federal dollars, but we want to try to address the housing crisis with new builds while we do repairs. Repairs is a big problem, one that we heard mostly from our participants in their housing needs. So kind of the next 5 years, we're bringing in modular units right now. We're bringing in 20. That was kind of to address, that was the only way we could do it within a year, was to bring them in. But we do not want to stick to modular. We want to mix, right? So we want a mix of, modular, stick-built. And we heard from participants, they'd like log homes, particularly participants in Sigachik, really did voice that. So they'd like a more traditional home. So we're really looking at kind of a mix. Again, we don't want, 10 units in a row up the street, kind of looking the exact same, right? We want people to take pride in the home ownership, so we will be looking at a mix of things. And obviously with stick-built, we have a better opportunity to put people to work, to train people, and things like that. The NETAD Gwich'in Council is also working on a tiny home village. So this is about 8 homes, 8 tiny homes, which is a mix of transitional and emergency housing, with a central hub and cultural facility, with outdoor culturally appropriate space. So this is a very significant project undergoing in Nunavik right now, which the NETAD Gwich'in Council has CMHC funding for. And through Indigenous Services Canada, they're committing to 25 years of operational funding for this facility for that transitional and emerging housing piece. So this is a very significant project, which is in the works and hopefully concluded in 2025. And then looking for outside the Gwich'in settlement area. Like I mentioned, we have 60% of our participants live outside of the Gwich'in settlement area. So, can we get land in Yellowknife and Whitehorse, in those areas where there's a lot of Gwich'in participants? Can we build duplexes or fourplexes, something modest to start with, and look at market rentals to help out our Gwich'in participants? But that's kind of where we're going, once we take care of the housing crisis within the Gwich'in settlement area. That's it, but maybe just to summarize, some of the themes of the presentation. Obviously, utilizing UNDRIP principles to guide policy changes, supporting Indigenous self-governance in housing design, development, and management, advocating for Indigenous-led housing initiatives that reflect community priorities, fostering collaboration with the GTC and other Indigenous governments to create culturally relevant housing programs, and really engaging with Indigenous governments and their private sector partners to explore innovative housing solutions like modular, stick-built, and community-driven projects such as the NETAD Tiny Home Village. Merci for having us present, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I'm very impressed. So now I will now ask members if they have any questions, and we'll start with Mr. Testart.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cooey, for your presentation, and thank you for being here today. I just wanted to ask more about you purchasing, or the GTC having to purchase land in its traditional territory. I think that's highly problematic, especially where we are with Truth and Reconciliation and implementing UNDRIP and all the things that we stand for as a government committed to reconciliation. Could you speak to, if you had the time to work through that, what that would look like how we would be able to ensure Indigenous nations have access to traditional territories for development in this way? Thank you.
Mr. Cooey?
Merci, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I think this is kind of next on one of our priority lists, is to focus on that, right? So I think, again, we're pushing on the GNBT with respect to procurement, and I think land is next. We're not seeing procurement opportunities in our settlement area. We're not seeing, the negotiated contract policy. We're not getting those opportunities or what we think our fair share is. So procurement's number one, and then obviously land and kind of is number two, right? There was, back in the day, as I understand it, and again, I've only been with GTC for 2 years, but there was Gwich'in municipal lands, which was transferred. So I think there's an opportunity to speak to, kind of see how it's going. Is kind of GTC having maybe even a first right of refusal for land sales in the Gwich'in settlement area. We are obviously in just government. We want to see the 4 communities within the Gwich'in settlement area proceed and move forward. So there is opportunities for housing, not just from GTC, housing, all related infrastructure. But just having those conversations about what it means, right? Like we think we're a fairly fair and just government, again, looking for those to proceed, but I think it's kind of just having the conversation that our inherent rights of the Gwich'in Tribal Council are there, and starting with recognizing that is how I see it starting. I see, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Testart, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that response. The 25% set aside for down payments and rents, is that something you take out of the market rent you've decided on, or do you factor that in to rents when you're doing the calculation? So essentially, is that 25? Are you adding 25% to O&M rate or rents to pay your O&M, or is it just they're paying rent and you're making the choice to set it aside? Thank you.
Mr. Cooey?
Merci, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, we don't see it as a top-up on the rent. We want to stick within the targets that we're doing, but we see it as an opportunity to, again, help our participants. Getting the down payment for a home is a big issue, for a lot of people in Northwest Territory, a lot of people in Canada, let's face it, right? So we're not looking to mark it up and save that for them, but we're looking to help our Gwich'in participants with down payments, and that's what that's designed to do. Merci, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. McNeely, do you have any questions?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm glad to see this model. I'm glad to see this model because it addresses what we see already and hear already on the housing crisis. So I compliment the GTC for providing housing and in this case ownership. Ownership will bring pride back to the community, healthy communities, healthy families, and so on. So there's quite a domino effect to have pride in what you're going to eventually own. And you've designed a model to achieve that. And looking at it from a hedge fund, it's going to be a continued revolving account to build further real estate. My question is I'm not familiar with the allocation of housing NWT units to the Gwich'in settlement area, but is there economy of scale that you've had with negotiating those units as well? Let's just pick a number and say, okay, if there's 2 or 3 or half a dozen units allocated to the GDC, and now your economy of scale would be more affordable to have more units with what your budget already allows. Have you had discussions on that front with the Housing Corporation? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cooey?
See, Madam Chair, we haven't had discussions with Housing NRT in specific to that. We know they are bringing in some modular units into some of our communities right now. And again, they look quite similar to ours, so I know they're building, I think it's 2 in McPherson right now, in Talizay right now, that they're bringing in. But, for their public housing programs, we're trying to stay out of public housing. Obviously, that's something that'll come forward as kind of Gwich'in government moves forward, and looking to include that, and then eventually draw down on social housing at some point in the future. And then we kind of have the whole shebang of the whole Gwich'in program, and then the social or public housing. So we haven't had conversations with them. Housing NPT was quite helpful with us. They did provide us 2 lots in McPherson where we were really tight on land. So, they donated one of those lots. The other one they had a lease on, and they let the lease, they relinquished the lease, and then we applied for it right away, and then we did have to purchase that from the GNWT. But kind of, your comment about Housing Corp building homes and us as well building homes, right? I think the key issue there, and you probably hear it on the financial side of the GNBT and from Housing NWT, is not the cost to build the home, but the cost to operate the home over time. So that's where we're also concerned, is that the federal government, I think, is good at, when they need to kickstart the economy, they're good at obviously providing infrastructural dollars to build a bunch of stuff. But once you build a bunch of stuff, how do you maintain that stuff over 20 to 30 years, right? And that's where there's lack of funding. So when you spoke about a hedge fund, we're contemplating, do we take all the rents? Do we take all the mortgages? Do we create our own fund so that we do have funding set aside in the future to help participants with their homes when they need emergency repairs, or at what level is that? Can we draw down on a fund that's growing for 10 to 15 years before that home needs substantial things? So those are the types of things we're thinking about when you speak to a fund and how to operate that home kind of in the future. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. McNeely, you have a follow-up?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. My next question is, including the SAW-2, I'm a beneficiary of the SAW-2 land claim. I've never really heard, is there multi-year funding from the federal government to the Indigenous organizations in the NWT, including GTC? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Madam Chair. I can't speak for other Indigenous governments, but for the GTC, we are provided about $50 million from the federal government one time, so we get the money over 3 to 4 years. But those are infrastructure related, so that was either to build new homes, repair homes. So that's the funding pot we're limited to. We are understanding that through the Urban, Rural, and Northern Fund that the federal government is working on. I think it's about 7 years of ongoing funding. We're just understanding what our allocations are. So that will be an allocation over 7 years, which will be a steady stream for Indigenous governments, but that's just being kind of identified and released right now. So we're just starting to hear kind of the specifics of it. But that would be the only kind of ongoing funding stream for the next 7 years. But other than that, it's more like one time, just what I spoke to, kind of help kickstart the economy or help address the housing crisis immediately, like one-time money to start addressing that problem. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we're still on our first round of questions, so I'll go to Mr. Nurse.
Good morning, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's good to see that the Indigenous governments are looking out for their participants, particularly in housing when we're in a housing crisis throughout Canada, let alone our smaller communities. Public engagement, how much did you have a good turnout in each of the communities that you went into in terms of land selection, community needs and home ownership? Because I've been getting a lot of calls from, I'm sure you wouldn't have any problem finding potential home ownership applicants from each of the communities, because there is a need for home ownership because they don't meet the criteria of public housing because their threshold. So how much of a public engagement did you have within each of the communities in terms of these three like land selection, community needs, and home ownership applicants? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Madam Chair. So we held 4 engagement sessions in each community. We really started with, we built community development plans. That was kind of based on the community wishes. So we went to the community 4 times with those community development plans, and it wasn't specific to housing, it was specific to all kinds of infrastructure, right? So housing was our priority, but there is a wide list of there, obviously a lot of stuff with schools and elder homes and the nursing stations and things like that, right? The health centers. So those are things on our radar that aren't GTC's responsibility, but that we do need to work with the GNWT on. But, our focus was on addressing the housing crisis. So I know when we purchased land, so we did a lot of engagement on those community development plans, to the question. And then, when we purchased land from the town of Inuvik, we purchased land from the hamlet of Fort McPherson. We purchased land from the designated Gwich'in organization in Aklavik, and we purchased land from the GNWT in Sigachik. So there was consultation, or not consultation, but engagement requirements on those communities of Inuvik, Tetlizay, McPherson, and Sigachik on the GNWT and the hamlet and the town. So I understand that, when we purchased land from the town of Inuvik and the hamlet of Tetlizay, that, they do first and second reading, it gets on the table, that hamlet or town go out and do their consultation on the sale of those lands to the GTC. And I think that's about a 3-week process, that it's open before they consider third reading. So there was engagement, but it was done by those community governments that we were purchasing land from. Missy, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Nersu, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, more on your rent-to-own program. You're looking at staying in with between the $1,500 and $2,500 range, and so 75% of that payment will go towards the rental fee, and 25% of that will go for future use if you want to buy the home out or get another home within the community. Will that 25% be used toward that? Is the rental fee a set price, or is it going to be yet to be determined? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Missy, Madam Chair. So it's not set yet, but it will be a set price. We're just finalizing the cost of the homes and then trying to get in that target. So that target of between $1,500 and $2,500 would be a participant's rent plus all the utilities, insurance, like everything, all the costs. So, I mean, when we design our rent price, we need to kind of work backwards. So the average price of fuel, average price of water, everything like that, all the utilities, we need to kind of work backwards to get to that number. So again, say the rent is $1,500, just as an example. Again, 75% of that will go to the GTC as rent revenue, which again, we might put into a fund to save for future costs, and 25% will be saved, as protected dollars for that participant to either purchase the Gwich'in home within the 5 years or purchase another home in the community within the 5 years. Missy, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooey. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks so much for coming all this way to make this presentation. It's really good information for us to have. My first question is whether GTC is involved in helping to facilitate or create more training programs for beneficiaries, community members, especially around like home maintenance. It sounds like you're investigating a program for funding emergency repairs in homes. Is there a problem currently finding the skilled tradespeople or other people who can actually do these kind of repairs and maintenance on homes? And if so, is there some sort of plan to help ensure there's more local capacity to do that work? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Missy, Madam Chair. We're having issues finding people to work. I talked about the problem, but maybe I'll ask Ms. Jarvis if she wants to go further on this question. Missy, Madam Chair.
Ms. Jarvis?
MSC, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's difficult to get people to work. We are trying to utilize Gwich'in businesses in all the communities. So there are typically some small businesses in the communities. On the 20 modular homes that we're doing right now, we've pushed we're utilizing 2 contractors, and we're pushing them to work with local Gwich'in businesses or hire Gwich'in participants to do some training. So one of the foundations is a triodetic, so they're using those participants to train them so that on future builds, which Housing Corporation or other organizations do that type of foundation, those participants are trained. We want to look at doing some apprenticeships, but we need to finish our housing plan for the next few years so that we can employ those people and get them into an apprenticeship, as an apprenticeship is 3-4-year program. So we can't sign them on just for a 1-year project. We want to be able to have them for 3 or 4 years. So once we finalize our housing plan, then we'll be able to do that. Missy.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Morgan, do you have a follow-up question?
Thanks. I mean, I definitely want to hear lots more about that, but I'm also super curious to hear more about the tiny home village. You said that the 8 homes will be a mix of transitional and emergency housing, if I got that correct. Is the idea to have like staff people or 24/7 support around these tiny homes, like wraparound supports, or how, if they're each individual homes, like how will people be supported through that process, especially if they're coming from in really difficult situations, it's hard to right away be able to, like manage your own home and take care of things. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Merci, Madam Chair. Yeah, so the tiny home project, it's being designed and built by the NETAT Gwich'in Council, which is one of our designated Gwich'in organizations. So it's not really for us to speak to, but I can say that that is obviously a consideration, and so that was negotiated into the 25-year funded from Indigenous Services Canada. So things like security, what those wraparound services are. But I think where we come in as GTC is what those wraparound services are. So what can our GTC Health and Wellness Department provide to that project? When those transitional emergency houses are built and served, what services do they need that our Health and Wellness Department will provide, similar to how we provide to all our Gwich'in participants. So we're really building up our Health and Wellness Department. I think about a year ago, it was a staff of 3, and it'll be a staff of about 12 here in a few months. So we're building our own capacity to look to the future for projects like that so that we could do it. But there will be wraparound services, there will be security, obviously as part of that project. See, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cooey. Ms. Yakalaya, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Wow, very impressive. I'm very happy to hear this is going on and that you guys seem to be so well organized. And it might have taken a lot of work to get to where you are today, so I'm very impressed. Question I have is, would you engage other organizations such as Aurora College to help with your training plan for building, or will you just use GTC? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yakalaya. Mr. Cooey?
Merci, Madam Chair. Yeah, so we'll engage whatever partners we need to. I mean, we do support the Aurora College and, with trade programming in the region, right? We do help sponsor some events to get our Gwich'in participants into it. But we do have our own education programs and policies that are kind of top-ups to student are separate from student financial assistance for Gwich'in participants. So we are trying to focus on our own trades programs. But we will partners with the college, obviously. Trade programming is fairly expensive, so the more partners we have, the better that we could do that. So, training and education is obviously the goal, right? Which is why we speak about, next phase maybe being more stick-built and, having that education and program and training ready in advance so that we could get more people trained and get more people working through the process that we can do with modular homes. See, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Yakalaya, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. The other question I have is, what is your you talked about hard to get people to work and getting people off the social income to get them back to being independent. So what is your motivational plan to help people become self-sufficient? Do you have a plan in place, or does your Gwich'in Tribal Council Health and Wellness have a plan to assist the people that Ms. Morgan brought up, people that are living in a difficult situation and moving into a place where they're not, accustomed to paying bills or maintaining houses or, yeah, so do you have a plan? Be nice to hear that. Thank you.
Mr. Cooey?
Merci, Madam Chair. So I think the housing programs we just spoke to is kind of the first plan. So when I spoke to, you have people in public housing that are maybe on the threshold, right? They don't want to earn any more income because it's going to affect their rent. It might affect their unit. So providing those folks that are on the threshold with the opportunity to be homeowners, and then obviously the training around that, right? The 101 of what does it mean to owning a house, right? And the repairs and things like that. The Housing Corp and Kate's well familiar with this, used to have, kind of that 101 of owning a home. They had all these training programs, which we have talked to the Housing Corp about using. But I think just providing opportunities for home ownership and just building equity in your home and having pride that you are a homeowner now. I think that's kind of the first opportunity. And then it helps with the public housing situation and that wait list if we can move those people on the threshold into home ownership, and then we can get other individuals and residents into those public housing units. So I'd say what we're doing right now is the first start of the plan. See you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions too, because just like Ms. Yakala said, that you guys are well organized, and I think you're advanced. This is the first that I'm hearing of this housing policy or housing models that you guys just presented. And I do like, I like it, because I think it's, and I hope a lot of others are going to follow suit, or maybe they do have a plan in place, but I haven't heard much about it. And this is the first that I heard from an Indigenous government doing a presentation to us, explaining their housing models. So I really, I am impressed. And so I know they touch base on a lot of other questions that, but maybe I can hear from both of you, because you talked about the modulars. There's 20 modular homes that you guys currently have. And the stick built, it's going to take a while because it's going to last long. With the modular homes, we know that there's a 15 years lifespan. And after 15 years, there's a lifespan for, how these houses are built. But the stick built, I think it's going to last longer, because we see that in many of the communities that it's still standing, a lot of them, and especially the log house. So, so you said that within the next 5 years, you're going to be building some of these, even the tiny homes village. And you're in partner with Aurora College to train more trades, or have you thought about to partner with the southern institutions where they can come and deliver the programs to train more trades, because trades is the thing that's holding us back in many of our small communities, and I was saying the other day, we have a oil burner mechanic in my region who retired 3 times, so I'm sure you're probably going through the same thing that, from the Aurora College days, or Arctic College when it was called, So, so I just wanted to know if, with the modular homes, where are all the modular homes in the Gwich'in area? Is it only in Inuvik, or is it spread out through the Gwich'in settlement area? Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, Mr. Kui.
Merci, Madam Chair. So there's 9 homes going into Inuvik this year. There's 8 going into Tetlitze or Fort McPherson, and then there's 3 going into Aklavik. We did have some supply chain issues, so we were hoping to get the 3 barged in, but they're sitting in Inuvik right now, and we'll get them in when the ice is thick enough and safe. So those are where the 20 are going this year. I'll address a few of the other comments and then pass it to Ms. Jarvis to speak about kind of our warranty and things like that on the homes, and kind of the length of the life of a modular home versus a stick built. But with the trades, trades are priority, right? So we are supporting Aurora College. We do sponsor some of their trade programs. I think we have one coming up in November, early December, that we do sponsor. We are trying to work with them. We are looking at, obviously, Southern partners as well. There's a lot of really interesting things that are done. We looked at one in Edmonton where they come to your community. So they send the appropriate people to your community. They have about 10 to 15 students in it, and they actually build like 2 tiny homes. And then at the end of the day, the Indigenous government owns their homes for however they want to do it. But the main purpose is to train those 10 to 15 people in kind of all aspects of building a home. So there is a lot of interesting things that are done by some of these providers in the south that obviously can help address the housing crisis as you're training them. So those are the kind of things that we're really looking at going forward on the trades, because I agree trades is one of the biggest thing, and how do we have those people in the communities going forward. But I'll pass the question about our warranty and the length or the life of a home to Ms. Jarvis. Let's see, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Jarvis?
Missy, Madam Chair. So modular homes have come a long way in like the last 10 to 15 years. The homes that we have that we're providing into the GSA, they have some warranties from 20 to 25 years. So they last substantially longer than 15 years. They're essentially the same as a stick build. They're just built in a controlled environment, in a factory line. So the assembly is much faster. You don't have to worry about weather and things like that. So it's the same as a stick-built home, but it's just done inside and kind of in a controlled environment. And then they're shipped in 2 pieces and put together. The roof systems are finished, there's siding, there's roofing, a lot of stuff that's done on site. So they essentially are the same as a stick-build, just built in a factory. Typically with a stick-build, when it's 10 years, 25, and 40 years, you're expected to do some kind of major repairs. So after 10 years, some things start happening and you need to fix them. At 25 years, like your furnace, roofing, those types of things, and then again at 40 years. So a typical stick-built home is 50 years life expectancy, but if you do those repairs over the time, you'll extend that life. So it's the same. These modular homes will be the same, and they're well insulated. They have triple glazed windows. Some of them have metal roofing, metal siding. The finishes that we did on these homes are not cheap. We upgraded them to make sure that they're can sustain the Arctic, and then also wear and tear of people. Let's see.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. I know that, listening to your presentation, that trying to do something different from housing NWT policy, I like that. I think there's a lot of people that are trying to get away from, not to mirror housing NWT policies, that's in place now, because there's good and bad to a lot of those policies, because I've said it many times too, because of that, we have lots of homeless issue. So I really, I like what you said here, policies reflecting Gwich'in cultures and values, Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Ms. Madam Chair. So I agree. When we first started, we kind of took a look at, what Housing Northwest Territories did, what other Indigenous governments did. Like there's a lot, like as you mentioned, there's a lot of good examples. There's some learning opportunities as well as what happened to houses, down the road when I speak to, making sure these houses are maintained. So kind of learning from mistakes of others. But we really had the opportunity, right, being an Indigenous government, really to tailor what we needed to what works for our Gwich'in participants. So when the MLA asked kind of the engagement sessions we did, right, we went there, we spoke to them, and it was more what's on our mind, right? So we went with a version of these slides earlier this year, said, these are what we're thinking for the programs, this is the cost of the programs, the design of it, what do you think, right? How does it, as a Gwich'in participant, that could be living in the home, what do you think? And, we heard a lot back. And, we tweaked it and we incorporated from there, took it to our board of directors, and this is kind of the direction we're heading. So, we do really have a unique opportunity to tailor, kind of the best practices to something that works for our Gwich'in people and that is culturally appropriate. So that's kind of what you see here today, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have time for second set of questions. So I will start with Mr. Testart and then Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I have you here, Mr. Cooey, you mentioned that the Yukon had an innovative way of working around their debt ceiling and finding a way to finance capital expenditures. And I know you have considerable experience with the government of the Northwest Territories finances. So could you, even though it's kind of outside of scope of this, I'm very interested to gain your thoughts on how we could perhaps do a better job of that here in the NWT. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cooey?
Madam Chair. Yeah, so as I understand it in the Yukon, so the social and public housing is contracted out to the Indigenous government, who builds the homes, and there's a long-term lease obviously associated with that that they can finance the builds off of. So I know they do build and operate those homes, and then the Yukon government or their housing corp runs their public housing programs out of that. So it is it obviously is a economic opportunity for those Indigenous governments and development corps that do that. Understand the limitation here would be, so you enter into a long-term lease, it's likely a capital lease, which likely impacts the territorial borrowing limit. Because capital leases, well, you could have just built it yourself, right? So you're just really financing on the backs of an Indigenous government. So, the accounting rules would call that a capital lease. It would impact your borrowing limit. So I don't exactly know how the Yukon territory is working around that, but I do understand it's happening. And I think we're going there in a month or two to continue conversations with them. And so I do understand that, it's kind of open. So, we talked about, our previous Grand Chief did talk to them about, getting land just outside Whitehorse or in Whitehorse. And it seemed to me from my discussions with the Indigenous governments over there is that, the government is quite open to providing land to Indigenous governments over there at nominal value. So there are opportunities out there. Again, we're just starting to explore it. But my understanding is that those are working. They have the same limitations that the GNT would with a borrowing limit. So I think it might be a good example. But yeah, obviously when we know more, we can provide that information to committee as well. See, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Okay. Mr. McNeely?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really, from your developer's position, I really enjoy this discussion to see that you're building healthy communities, if you really think about it. And I guess the biggest trick is or the biggest challenge is to get your footage cost down to make it more affordable for the end user, and then also make it more energy efficient. But you have that authority, similar to the initiative taken by the Gwich'in housing program. They have a plan there, and I'm always willing to advertise what they're doing. They've got 36 buildings on the ground. Some of them are bachelor suites designed for that that crowd of beneficiaries, and they've got other sizable buildings as well as modulars. So it's really designing your housing plan to meet what the expectations are of the beneficiaries. And of that, so from that, I'm really happy to see that happening. And then building on healthy communities through the home ownership initiative is even more, in my view, more stable in building the communities now, rather than putting your equity into an RSP, you're putting it into a building that you're sooner going to later own at a value of, let's pick a number and say $200,000. So for that, there's all sorts of benefits in what you're doing. And on the big demand for trades, you have the authority to expedite and support trades. If I look at two of the Sahtu communities, there's a young fellow there that has his journeyman electrician ticket, and now he's working for his home community. And same thing with a neighboring community. There's an individual that has his ticket in the oil burner mechanics as well as plumbing. Now they're helping the housing plan for the community. So it's very encouraging to see that, and it really sends a message to the next generation while you're being a developer. So that's why I asked earlier if you're getting further federal funding so you can keep that program going, keep building. One or two houses or half a dozen ain't going to make a difference. Even in Delna, you got 36 units. Yes, it's a huge amount, but it hasn't really fixed the problem. There still is a waiting list. So I'm just sharing that and saying keep up the good work.
Okay, so that was more of a comment. But Mr. Cooey, do you want to reply or?
Sure.
Thank you.
Merci, Madam Chair. Yeah, and merci for the comments. So, yeah, I totally agree, right? And the 20, or that's just putting a small dent in the problem, right? So, I mean, you know, when I spoke to the home assessment and emergency repair program, I think that's kind of the next big thing that we're really looking to solve as well, right? You know, whether it be cupboards, whether it be stairs, whether it be, you know, full out structural issues or you know, electric problems. From what we understand it, the repair problem out there is a big one, and participants are really screaming for repairs. So that's kind of the next step, is bringing in homes and finding a way to fix up the current homes that people have, and funding that and using some of the federal dollars that we're getting and we will be getting in the future to that. So we're currently in the process of trying to figure that out. But merci for the comment. Merci, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Nersu, do you have a question?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. My question is in regards to the tiny homes versus income support recipients, because I continuously get after the department to try and bring back the productive choices, because in the Mackenzie Delta we have 15% of the population that's on income support versus 7% across the NWT. So it is a big concern to me. I represent 3 of the 4 communities, and you know, these tiny homes were, I know it's stated that it's in the next 5 years that the NETEC Gwich'in will be building these homes. It'd be good if some of these, maybe the other communities, I can probably see if they can invest in something like that too, because it is something that will give the participants a sense of independence and ownership. Right now, the NWT housing provides them with houses, public housing, and EC&E takes care of all their utilities, so they don't have to do anything. They don't have a sense of independence or anything. They're just, this land claims that was settled signed in 1992. It was based on having the Gwich'in be more self-reliant and independent, less reliant on the government. But today we're still reliant on them, and I've been continuously asking the departments, you know, like EC&E all has stated that they do have funds for programs that they can, the communities can utilize and start programs. Maybe some of these can be used towards these housing programs where they can, you know, maybe get into some apprenticeships of some sort, because through Canada, that's what we're lacking is tradespeople. And it's just, it goes into everything that we're trying to do. Education is pitiful. It's pitiful. I've been trying to tell the minister, actually gave me some kind of document that they said they're a plan that they're trying to implement, but I know, I never looked at when was this plan ever brought up. But going back to housing, you know, it's a good initiative that you guys are doing. I commend you on that, and you know, wish you all the best in the future, and you know, just continue to try to. I'd like to work with you guys in finding some sort of a solution to getting our beneficiaries off income support and being more self-reliant. That's a goal of mine while I'm here in the next 3 more years anyway. Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a comment than anything.
Okay, thank you. You're okay, or you want to reply? Mr. Cooey? Yes, okay.
Merci, Madam Chair. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll be willing to have those conversations, and I think it's important as well. So maybe just a quick comment to the tiny homes. You know, we really focused on kind of the larger 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom with this phase, because we heard overcrowding was kind of the biggest concern facing our communities, so we focus on the bigger ones, but I agree, right, the tiny home village is a good example. The bachelor suites, that type of thing, right, having a mix in the different sizes is kind of the goal that we're looking to, but we really needed to address the overcrowding, which we heard was the biggest issue, so that's why we went with kind of the 2 or 3 bedrooms during this model, but the goal is to have a better mix. Yeah, and absolutely looking for opportunity ways to help fund future programs such as the Need Tiny Home Village. Now that we have an infrastructure and housing and infrastructure department, right? We have some pathfinders that could help other organizations kind of work through what those funding opportunities are. So happy to work with you on that, as well as anything related to our beneficiaries and participants as well. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morgan, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You had mentioned in your home ownership programs that the participant has to qualify for and obtain a mortgage, but you would help them out with the down payment. Do people experience a lot of barriers in trying to qualify for and obtain mortgages, or is that relatively straightforward for Gwich'in participants? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cooey?
Madam Chair. Yeah, I doubt it's really relatively straightforward, right? And again, it's having the financial capacity that the bank is going to okay you, and having the employment that backs that up, right? And that employment stream. So, we're trying to help our participants out in qualifying for mortgage, and we still think, with our programs, our homes they cost more than the ability for a person to satisfy a mortgage, right? So the market rate for a house in Inuvik or McPherson or a Klavic is not what we're paying for those homes, right? So we anticipate, we're going to have to, write down our homes right away to what those market rates are, and then kind of between there, we still think we're too expensive for people to be able to afford it. So that's where we come to that forgivable loan between the market rate and what we're actually going to sell these homes, or what participants can get a mortgage for. So that's where that forgivable loan portion comes in. So we are trying to make it affordable, and that's where we come in, and to try to help them obviously apply for a mortgage and everything that they do need to do that, right? We're still not sure, depending, whether GTC is going to need to back those mortgages to help participants get into them. But that's something we're prepared to do, because then we still get first lien on the asset, right? So the home still sticks in the nation, which is a goal of the program. So those are some of the things that we're going to be faced with when we get to that application part. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, we've heard that in other parts of the territory, but I wondered if there was something different. But yeah, it sounds like there are some common challenges to obtaining mortgages. Another thing you mentioned in your presentation was that the eligibility for the homeownership and rent-to-own programs, it's not eligible to people who are involved in illegal or illicit activities. I'm wondering how you determine that or enforce that. I mean, that's a problem we see across the territory with people, and maybe they're in public housing that may be engaging in illegal activities, but certainly people in the community are concerned, but maybe they haven't been formally charged, or it takes a long time for the RCMP to do investigations. And is that determined based on reports from people around in the community, or is it based on having a criminal record, or how do you actually try to block people who are maybe doing illicit things from participating in your housing programs? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Yeah, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's something we don't totally have figured out yet. It's going to be a challenge for us, similar to it is when it comes to something like that is evidently going to punish one of your participants. Obviously, it's going to be difficult, right? But I wouldn't say it wouldn't be based on hearsay. It would be based on some sort of evidence that this stuff is occurring, right? Small communities, lots of rumors about everything in small communities, right? So you got to make sure things are factual, and then have a process to follow it up. So we're looking at what that process is, right? Whether we have our own housing committee or whatnot, but trying to make that a non-leadership issue or non-political one. So people on that committee are, sticking to factuals and not making it sure it's a voter or a political issue. So those are some of the things we're working through right now on how we're going to deal with that. But I will recognize it will be challenging. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Yakalaya, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Yeah, That would be a challenging one, but it's doable because Housing NBT is doing it. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, just kind of look at places that they have successes and just implement those. That's basically what a lot of people are doing anyway. Um, so yeah, very good investment and good opportunity for your beneficiaries. And the question I have was, have you been asked or thought about for people to build, like they want to get a home, but they don't want to build it in Inuvik. Say they want to build it at Midway, or they want to build it someplace outside of the town, not just specifically right in the town. Have you guys thought about that, outside of the town boundary or municipal boundary or whatever? Is that something doable for your beneficiaries if they so requested? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Madam Chair, we've gotten a few requests. What if I just want to build a home? If I can acquire the land, build it anywhere. We're not looking at that right now. We're looking at GTC building these homes and making sure they're available again. Like our goals are to address the housing crisis, keep homes in the nation, and have somewhat control over the land. So the land is obviously the first way we can control what happens to that home. So kind of we want to ensure that we're striving for that, and not give a participant, again, what the program is not, for an ability to build a home and flip it using a subsidized, using our federal dollars to subsidize that and make that a quick profit. So that's why we're looking to own the land ourselves until such a time as they've satisfied a mortgage, and then transfer that to the family. So we're not looking at any other programs right now, but that request is common, and I'm sure it's common for other Indigenous governments, but we want to advance the interests of the nation and the participants and address the housing crisis, and not look at opportunities for people to make a profit or further their own goals is kind of what our policy objectives are right now. Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Yakala, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I meant was, like, if they wanted to build, say, because I think the boundary for a hamlet or municipality is about 13 kilometers out, right? So say they didn't want to build right in Inuvik or right in Sigachik or right in Aklavik, they can build a little ways out of town where they're, but you would have to, and then you did say that you will buy the land for people if they so choose to live. They're beneficiaries of the GTC. They want to live someplace where it's not so noisy, so populated, and because we all know that a lot of the communities have a lot of there's a lot of social ills happening in communities, and some people just want to live quietly, but not in the community. They want to live outside somewhere where it could be just within the boundary of, say, Inuvik or wherever. And would the GTC consider that for your participants? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooey?
Madam Chair. If we're getting all kinds of requests like that from our participants, obviously we'll consider it, because we are building houses for our participants, right? So again, when we get back to the culturally relevant and location, like it's all part of it, where our participants want to live, right? But I think right now we're trying to build a mass, so we need to build them kind of close together to get the best bang for our dollar. But that's obviously something we'll keep in mind for our beneficiaries as they're continuing to make those requests. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I have a question too as well here, because you said to build outside Gwich'in settlement area. Is it only limited for the NWT or outside of NWT? Because I see you have GTC office in Edmonton, you have one in Yellowknife, and the main office is in Inuvik. I think you did mention apartment, to accommodate your beneficiaries. So is it just only for the NWT, or is it for other province as well? Thank you.
Madam Chair. So we don't have it all fleshed out yet. But I mean, the previous vision of the previous Grand Chief was that, you know, we have a lot of Gwich'in participants around Yellowknife, around Whitehorse, around Edmonton, and that's why we have an office in Edmonton, so we can have programming for those participants in Edmonton. We have an office in Yellowknife to provide programming to participants here. We have a lot around Whitehorse. We are looking at office in Whitehorse to provide that programming to our participants there. So we know we have a need for housing in Yellowknife, Whitehorse, Edmonton. We can't do it everywhere, but that was the vision of the previous Grand Chief, so one will be taken to our new leadership. But is there opportunity to have a duplex or a fourplex and have similar programs or market rentals for those participants that might be homeless or on the cusp or whatnot? So those are some of the things we're looking at kind of over the next 5 years. So it'll depend on future leadership and where they want to go with it. But those are some of the things we're considering and looking into. Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. If there's no more questions, then I would like to say thank you for joining us today. So this concludes the public briefing for housing as a human right. Thank you, Mr. Cooey and Ms. Jarvis, for coming.